All right, welcome back. So I've mentioned to you about the Christmas special we did, Shrek the Halls, the Shrek franchise's holiday special. And I happen to have one of those images handy that I did for that show. And this wasn't ever intended specifically as a demonstration, but it so happens I still have a version of it that had all of my Photoshop layers in it, or at least most of them. And so this is a great lighting example that has to have a degree of believability in it, where I can take you step by step through the thinking process to build this up. Because we have bricks, we have a stone wall, we have wood, we have a green character of all things, we have a human character, and we have three different light sources on those realistic surfaces, or at least what ultimately in the final production will be realistic surfaces. It's a loose painting here. We have this, which we're treating as our key light, total cheat to illuminate M3/4 here. I'll talk about that more in a moment. We have this warm rim light that's coming from inside the room here. And then we have overhead atmospheric light. We have this cool light that's coming down from above. Any planes that are facing outward and upward, you see these little bits of coolishness. Those upward facing planes catch that upward atmospheric light. Okay? So we have to have a degree of believability on these different surfaces and on a yellow-green character. So here's what I had to start with. This is far into production, so that animatic movie, the rough cut, rough set, rough model movie has been put together, and this is what I have. It's no less disturbing than the one that I showed you earlier, but I can treat this as a layout. It has the perspective in it that I need, and it has the positioning of where the characters will appear in this scene. And then it's up to me to take it from there. I've got to invent everything else. I've got to invent the lighting. It needs set dressing. It's up to me to make those things happen. So first off, I know that I want to put a key light here, a lamp that's going to be our primary illumination. So I've taken the main character out so I can work on what's behind. And I'm starting to spotlight. I'm keeping with the local colors primarily of what's here, gray stone, warm wood, tinting everything for local color, and now I'm going to shine color of light into those local colors. So I add in my key light here, and I have the warm light source in the highlights, graduating just like we talked about, highlight, color of the light source, graduating gradually to the color of the surface. Next, I've got to make sure everything else relates to the character, so it's good to get the character established. I apologize to you. I wish I had step-by-step layers that I could show you the build-up of painting Shrek. I didn't happen to keep those many years ago when I initially put that together, so apologies on that. But I do have the rest, so let's go to the next step. So now I'm working out this character, and this is a bookstore. Shrek, being the ogre that he is, has never experienced Christmas before. But now he has a family, if you follow the Shrek movies. He has a wife who was a human raised in a castle who turns into a horrible ogre at night. And so she grew up with Christmas. He has 3 kids, and so it's their big first Christmas together. And he's embarrassed that he doesn't know how to celebrate Christmas. So he goes to a human bookstore in the local village, terrifying everyone, of course, but the bookstore lady is not rattled by him and gets him a book called The Village Idiot's Guide to Christmas. And when he walks out of the building, the scene that he sees are all of the holiday shoppers frantically running back and forth down the street, panicked because they're trying to do their last-minute shopping before the stores have closed. And so Shrek is completely baffled by this. So that's the character expression. Okay, so I've worked out the interior light of the building and the character back here. And I've fine-tuned what's happening over here to get that light coming across as well. Now, I've gone ahead and I've done some texture work over here. That's stone after all, so I've going to do a before and after here. And one more time without the fade, so you can see clearly what the changes are here. So it needed some set dressing. That's just up to me. So I invented this sign, and it seemed to me, this is a medieval setting, and they're speaking English. Who knows where in the medieval lands that they are. It's fairy tale land after all. It's generic, but I thought Canterbury books might have an appropriate kind of medieval ring to it. Chaucer, the author who wrote Canterbury Tales, famous medieval English author. He's famous particularly for those books and being the very first author to eschew writing his literature in Latin in favor of the English vernacular. That was considered heresy by the literary snobs at the time, but he did it. And also famous for popularizing the poetic form of iambic pentameter. So when you're sitting at dinner tonight with your family and they asked you what you learned in class, you can say, well, I learned that the medieval author Chaucer was famous for eschewing Latin and popularizing the poetic form of iambic pentameter. So mission accomplished. We've learned something. All right, back on topic. Next step, a little bit of fine tuning here. So a little bit more light from this, a little bit more texture. I want to bring this in the foreground right here. That's a foreground element coming forward. And so a little bit more work, if you can see that cursor over here. And a little more clear light to strengthen that light to justify how much glow we have over here. Next step, now you see this big change that's happened back here. I'm going back and forth, that big change happening. And let me describe why that change happened. The art director came over and had a look, the art director on the project. Great guy, great artist to work with. I enjoyed working with him then. I hope I have another opportunity to work with him again. But he gave me a note that I didn't agree with. Now, it doesn't matter if you don't agree with a note. Sure, you can say, well, I'm concerned about that for this, and this reason. That's absolutely fine. But if they say, well, I'd like you to try it anyway. This is a command structure. It's almost like being in the military. If the commander tells a soldier to charge the hill, that's it. You charge the hill whether you think you're going to survive or not. But I was a little concerned about the note because what he said was, why don't you, instead of illuminating her from this room, why don't you illuminate her from this light? And so that this area, the dominant or primary illumination, comes from this light rather than some kind of light inside the room. And I of course said, yeah, all right, let me take a pass at that. I'll take a pass at it and we'll see how it works out. But what I thought was, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's pushing it too far. It's already a stretch that this 3/4 light on Shrek, because after all, keying the character is primary. We need to light him 3/4 like this for this shot, even though we're loosely saying somehow that magically comes from this light. The light bends all the way around and 3/4 illuminates him. And then to go further, you're asking me to say that this same light bends back around this doorway back into the interior and lights her from this side, from the left? That's just being unreasonable. Not only that, if we kill the light coming from inside of the room, I'm going to lose this rim light that I carefully put on Shrek. And I did that intentionally so he stands clearly as a silhouette against the background. And then I have this dark here, so it formalizes and commits that silhouette. If we have light coming across here illuminating her, it'll also have to hit that door. I'll lose my entire value structure. But you go ahead, you take the note, you give it a try, and see what you can make of it. And so here's the change. Here she is, more strongly illuminated from the left here. This light hitting the door, and the room darkened. And lo and behold, it turns out that the art director was right. Because I think he wasn't even 100% sure what was bothering him. He just knew that there was some kind of emphasis over here that was hurting the scene. And he was absolutely right in that impression, because this is a scene, as I mentioned, about Shrek looking outward to the hubbub that's taking place in the street, and then the very next shot cuts looking off the other direction from his point of view, seeing what he's seen. This is not a scene about what's happening in the bookstore. It's a scene about what's happening outward in the street. And so the art director unconsciously felt that something was distracting over here and gave that note. So often, especially, and this art director is also an outstanding artist, but sometimes when you're working, in particular from someone like a director, an executive producer who is not personally an artist, they'll know and feel that something isn't quite right, but they won't have the experience as an artist to explain exactly what's wrong. And so they might give a misleading note. And what you'll learn as you are part of an art department and part of a team is you don't always literally address the note. You always first look, what's the impulse behind the note? What's the problem that the note is trying to address? Sometimes what they tell you to do is the correct way to solve the problem. Sometimes it's not. So don't do what they say all the time. Make sure you stop and think, what is the intent of the note? What is the problem being addressed? I have chased my tail in circles trying to exactly follow a note only for them to say, nah, that looks terrible. And you want to say, it's exactly what you told me to do. But it's not what they told you to do. You're the artist. You're the pro. Take command of the situation. You tell them, okay, you're telling me that that's the problem. I'm the artist. I can show you visually how to fix that problem. All right, so back and forth here. Too much emphasis on what's inside. And so I address the note. I cheat this dark. I keep the silhouette because it's just important for the value structure of the scene. Everybody's happy. And then, of course, because you got to do what you got to do, just like I described, late at night, when nobody was looking, I went back in. I brought the character back to how it had been before, addressed the note appropriately, and no one ever said a word to me about the change because it felt right. And that is how we do color keys at DreamWorks. There's a final little step here that I want to show you. It's just a little tiny fine tuning because our dominant light is here and there's a little bit of atmosphere in the environment. And so what I've done is I've spotlit this one little bit of fine tuning. I've spotlit and made sure that the illumination really feels like it's coming from here. And little contrasts in a corner like this, little bits that might be a distraction, just look at the subtle difference so we have a greater sense of light and atmosphere. Little final touches like that give an added sense of believability to a dominant light source. So I usually look for that kind of thing at the very end. So I make it about the character, less about little accidental contrasts that might be a distraction. Okay, so let's do it again. Let's take a look at this scene from Puss in Boots, color and lighting statement, where we have hot orange light coming from the one direction. It's from firelight, torchlight. And from the other direction, we have cool moonlight coming into the scene. And I did have, just like before, I did have material to start with. At the beginning of a show, of course, you've got to come up with everything from scratch. But in the later stages, when you're doing final lighting, you do have material already created as a basis. And so the first thing I needed to do was to set up the value structure to make sure I had a lighting statement, a light and shadow statement that would work for me. So my first step was to think that through to get a clear read on it, because remember, one of our properties of color is value. And so value structure is of critical importance when designing color. And so I can come into that now and design my warm and cool lighting to take these two characters, to illuminate them in an interesting way. This is a moment between a confrontation, and so this powerful illumination between the two is great storytelling. It connects the two together to help tell that story, to help the audience feel that powerful interaction they're having with each other. So I get that established, and then from there I can do my fine-tuning, and I can reference back. I have information about his features and about his pose existing here, and so I can refer back to that to help me render his character and his pose, and that's a nice thing to have. And so I've gone through and I've illuminated what is the local color, what are the colors of the light sources, and how do those two things interact. They interact by the same principles we've been discussing throughout this session. What happens to a yellow feather when you put a cool light on it? Well, it turns greenish. What happens to a yellow feather when you put warm light on it? Well, it turns kind of golden, instead of lemon yellow, it goes to a golden orangey yellow, so on and so forth. So that takes us to a completion of this lecture. And I want to give special thanks to the artists that I've used to show you some examples, because we want to learn from the very best. And I got permission from each of these artists to share some of their work with you. So you can see more at scottburdick.com, susanlyon.com, johnasaro.com. We haven't seen John Asaro yet. I'm about to give you your homework assignment, and I have a follow-up on that homework assignment where I'm going to show you a particular John Asaro piece that's going to be illuminating. Stay tuned with me. Stay on after I give you the homework assignment, because I have one additional idea. I've got one trick up my sleeve that I'm going to sneak in at the very end of this session that's going to help you in breaking down the complexities of light and color as you're trying to bring a compelling believability to your work. So stay tuned for that. And I also want to give special thanks to DreamWorks Animation for giving me permission to show you all of this artwork. Your homework. Your homework is to take this frame render. This is just like the two demonstrations, the step-by-steps that I've just showed you. To take this render, this gray render from Puss in Boots, or this one from How to Train Your Dragon, or this one, a human character or a facsimile of another one from Puss in Boots, to take that and to do a rendering. To do a rendering that has accurate color and light. So you're going to choose local colors. You're going to give him a local color of skin. You're going to choose local colors for his metallic armor, his clothing, and then you're going to light it. From one direction, I want you to put in a hot, warm light, like this. From the other direction, I want you to put in a cold light. So I want you to prove that you've understood the interaction of local color with a hot light, interacting with a hot light, and from the other direction, interacting with a cool light. Remember the process that we've gone through, what happens when a colored light meets a colored object. Because this is a gray sphere. If it happened to be a purple sphere, we would see something a little bit more like this. If it were a flesh tone sphere, it would be something like this, a little bit warmer. But if it were truly flesh-like, it had a little bit of translucency like skin with that subsurface scattering, it would have this. It would have that additional warmth and glow that comes from subsurface scattering. That's your homework assignment. It's meant to be straightforward and simple, though I know it won't necessarily be easy. So let me give you a few additional examples. Oh, and by the way, as I did that subsurface scattering version, I felt like that there could be even a little bit more luminosity in it. So something like this would be a flesh color, some kind of middle fleshy color, but then with that subsurface scattering, I think it would have even more luminosity and make this even more naturalistic. Which brings us to the examples that I wanted to show you, We'll start with this.